Well, I brought my bride and my daughter here today because I thought I would need an audience. So I'm a little surprised to see so many people, and I hope that by the end of the night you'll think it was worth coming. I'll do my best to make it worth your while. I was in London in 2013. Can people hear me okay?
Yeah.
Just want to be sure that's right. Okay. I was walking back to the hotel near the Tower Hill tube station through a parquet. There I came across a plaque marking the execution site of Thomas More, Bishop John Fisher, and many other English martyrs. Given the topography, it was not hard to imagine the scaffold and the spectators arrayed there so long ago. It could be used for that purpose again tomorrow. Thomas More kept the faith when it was physically lethal. In this part of the world, our challenge is to keep the faith in an age that can be spiritually lethal. How do we do that? We who are called by Jesus Christ to be salt and light to the world. As the notice says, I'm going to speak to you this evening as a Catholic who happens to be a judge about the challenges we face in being faithful in a secular society, the modern disease that saps us, its origin in secularization, its transmission through education, the leap of faith we are yet called to make, how this relates to the work of judges, and finally, the importance of cultivating not only the virtues, but also the disposition we need to be authentic witnesses to our faith. Can people still hear? Is it working? Okay, I have no sense of the feedback here. Okay. All right, so the challenges. The great Jesuit theologian and philosopher Bernard Lonnegan said this about our age. He said, "We are faced with a problem similar to that met by Aquinas in the 13th century. Then Greek and Arabic culture were pouring into Western Europe, and if it was not to destroy Christendom, it had to be known, assimilated, transformed. Today, modern culture, in many ways more stupendous than any other that existed, is surging around us," he said. It too has to be known, assimilated, transformed. So the question for you is, are we up to the challenge? Are we ready to know, assimilate, and transform modern culture? Or are we ripe to be known, to be transformed, and to be assimilated by that culture? The choice, it seems to me, is ours to make, many times, every day. The modern disease. We are afflicted by a modern disease. The French philosopher Paul Ricoeur asserts that our dominant existential stance is suspicion. He says this process of suspicion, which started several centuries ago, has already changed us. We are more cautious about our beliefs, sometimes even to the point of lacking courage. We profess to be only critical and not committed. I would say, he says, people are more paralyzed than blind. Why then are we so paralyzed? A critical element is surely secularization. That historical and cultural process is well explored by Canadian philosopher and political scientist Charles Taylor in his magisterial book, A Secular Age. I dare you to read it. It will take you a long time. If you can find the repeated chapters, because it hasn't been edited very well, that's even better. Over the last 4 centuries in the West, we have moved, says Taylor, from being a society where belief in God was unchallenged and indeed unproblematic, to a society where belief in God is understood to be just one option among others, and frequently not the easiest to embrace. This is, he says, a society in which faith, even for the staunchest believer, is but one human possibility among others. We can see this, can't we, among our friends, in our own families, perhaps even in ourselves. And then there is the aggressive, anti-religious version of secularism. It sees, says Taylor, secularism as an instrument to be used in the emancipation of individuals. People should be encouraged, manipulated, perhaps even compelled to abandon religion. Putting it in philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau's shocking terms, people must be forced to be free. This is the hard edge of a familiar attitude. As Taylor remarks, it just follows that you can't be fully into contemporary humanist concerns if you haven't sloughed off the old beliefs. You can't be fully in tune with the modern age and still believe in God. There is, Taylor notes, a patronizing coming to adulthood narrative about religion. Now, in a milieu where this stance dominates, he says, it can seem very hard to understand why anyone can believe in God. And the next step, adherence to a particular faith or church, is even less comprehensible. That stance is quite pronounced in the academic and professional worlds, isn't it? The influence of liberal education. We are the products of our education, and that education has a certain grain in it, like wood. It makes us weird. What do I mean by that? Neuropsychologist Jonathan Haidt argues that members of the cultural elite, including academics and university students, young professionals, lawyers, judges, and politicians, share certain general characteristics. We are Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. The acronym is WEIRD. So weird people like us, and I profess to being weird, we tend to be liberal secularists in our thought habits, whatever our personal convictions might be. Our shared habits of thought, says Haidt, skew the way most of us view the world and approach it. Haidt cites social science research to show that there are three moral clusters that underpin moral thinking: the ethic of autonomy, the ethic of community, and the ethic of divinity. Liberal secularists, Haidt claims, usually focus on the ethic of personal autonomy and tend to ignore the ethics of community and divinity. Many don't really get community or religion. Whatever our suppositions were when we started our liberal education, we have been thoroughly colonized by these secularist views. All has been put into doubt. All has been discounted, if not derided. We are tempted to equivocate of our faith, to hide it or even deny it. We are put to the test daily, if not more often. Let's then talk about the leap of faith. We can scarcely be salt and light if, as mature adults, we fail to appropriate anew, to appropriate continuously the verities of our religion. But that requires a real effort to grasp those verities. And many people find the effort and the moment of commitment to be especially difficult. Hence recurs description. We are not blind, but paralyzed. We understand, but some fear or inertia immobilizes us. Ricoeur makes what strikes me as an irrefutable claim. This is what he says: we cannot eliminate the element of risk. We wager on a certain set of values and then try to be consistent with them. Verification is then therefore a question of our whole life. No one can escape this. Anyone who claims to proceed in a value-free way will find nothing. I do not see how we can say that our values are better than all others, except that by risking our whole life on them, we expect to achieve a better life, to see and understand things better than others. End of quote. The important point to attend to in this is this point. Whether we like it or not, each one of us stakes our own life every time we make a fundamental choice. When people assert that they cannot or will not choose, they are in fact choosing, and they are staking their lives on that choice. Ricoeur, probably intentionally, echoes Blaise Pascal's famous wager: a decision in favor of the existence of God is a leap of faith. Pascal was a mathematician, scientist, and inventor. He was also the author of a spiritual classic entitled Pensée. He pondered how to make the faith attractive to people of his own mathematical and scientific mindset. That mindset is widespread, if not dominant today, isn't it? From this emerged what is known as Pascal's wager. It goes like this: either God is or he is not. But to which view shall we be inclined? Reason cannot decide this question. Infinite chaos separates us. At the far end of this infinite distance, a coin is being spun that will come down heads or tails. How will you wager? Reason cannot make you choose either. Reason cannot prove either wrong. Do not then condemn, he says, as wrong those who have made a choice. To the objection that the right thing is not to wager at all, Pascal offers this response: yes, but you must wager. There is no choice. You are already committed. What will you choose then? Since you must necessarily choose, your reason is no more affronted by choosing one rather than the other. That is one point cleared up. But your happiness. Let us weigh up the gain and the loss involved in calling heads that God exists. Let us assess the two cases. If you win everything. If you lose nothing. Do not hesitate then. Wager that he does exist. And on it goes. You might well be with Pascal, at least as far as that. God exists. But Pascal demands more. He demands not only intellectual assent, but passionate engagement. This is where you might flinch in your modern paralysis. Pascal pushes you on. Now, what harm will come from you from choosing this course? You will be faithful, honest, humble, grateful, full of good works, a sincere, true friend. It is true you'll not enjoy noxious pleasures. I wouldn't put beer among noxious pleasures, okay? Noxious pleasures are glory and good living. But will you not have others? I tell you that you will gain even in this life, and that at every step along this road you will see that it is your gain is so certain and your risks so negligible that in the end you will realize you have wagered on something certain and infinite for which you have paid nothing. This remarkable wager has become part of our spiritual heritage as Christians. Does it still resonate? But we flinch, don't we? Consider some pertinent words from C.S. Lewis arising from his own experience. People, he said, are reluctant to pass over from the notion of an abstract and negative deity to the living God. I do not wonder. You have had a shock like that before, he says, in connection with smaller matters. When the line pulls at your hand. When something breathes beside you in the darkness. So here, the shock comes at the precise moment when the thrill of life is communicated to us along the clue we have been following. It is always shocking to meet life where we thought we were alone. Look out, we cry, it's alive. And therefore, this is the very point at which so many draw back. I would have done so myself if I could, and proceed no further with Christianity. An impersonal God, well and good. A subjective God of beauty, truth, and goodness inside our own heads, better still. A formless life force surging through us, a vast power which we can tap, best of all. But God himself, alive, pulling at the other end of the cord, perhaps approaching at an infinite speed, the hunter, king, husband, that is quite another matter. There comes a moment when the children who have been playing at burglars hush suddenly. Was that a real footstep in the hall? There comes a moment when people who have been dabbling in religion, man's search for God, suddenly draw back. Supposing we really found him. We never meant it to come to that. We're still supposing he had found us. So it's a sort of Rubicon. One goes across or not. But if one does, there is no manner of security against miracles. One may be in for anything. An aside on judging, if I can now just divert completely from that those strong words of C.S. Lewis. So let's say we make the commitment that Pascal calls us to make. How do we live in a secular world? Particularly those of us who hold public office and are sworn to uphold the law, like judges, like me. I can only speak for myself. It is worth recalling the instruction of Jesus, which, like so many of his instructions, is at once beguilingly simple and remarkably difficult. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. I've been a judge for about 7 years, and I can say that I've never had an occasion on which these two have collided, nor do I expect such an occasion to arise. Why is that? I accept without reservation the rule of law. We judges are not free to do whatever we want. We are not free to indulge our personal notions of what justice is, or to impose our religious or moral views on the parties to the litigation before us. I swore an oath, on the Bible as it happens, to faithfully, impartially, and to the best of my knowledge and skill, execute the duties of the judge of the Court of Appeal for Ontario. I take that oath seriously, as do my colleagues. My judicial mantra goes like this: do the right thing, for the right reason, in the right way, at the right time, and in the right words. This is, of course, an aspiration, but I know of no judges who lack it. Even so, we all fall short of that aspiration, being human. Let me unpack this mantra for a moment. Each element is pregnant with meaning. Do the right thing. Most people would equate doing the right thing with doing justice in the particular case. The relevant rights and obligations of the parties are defined by law, either in the common law made by judges or in the law made by other instruments of the state, such as policy, regulation, statute, or in the Constitution. This is the rule of law in action. The law defines the applicable rights and obligations and the available outcomes. The principled approach is to consider the facts, apply the law, and reach the just result. That said, the meaning of the word justice has been a central preoccupation of Western civilization. We ought always to be challenged to discern the true meaning of justice. For the right reason. In the play Murder in the Cathedral, T.S. Eliot recounts the martyrdom of St. Thomas of Becket, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury. He had incurred the enmity of King Henry, his former drinking buddy, and had gone into exile. After some years, the Archbishop returned and was making his way to his cathedral of Canterbury. One of his followers suggested that he do something to provoke martyrdom, to which the Archbishop replied, "The last temptation is the greatest treason, to do the right thing for the wrong reason." His crucial insight was that the wrong motive for an action corrupts the outcome. The secular variant would be that the well-worn expression that hard cases make bad law. If the law is distorted to get to what seems to be the right result, then the distortion lives on to do its own mischief. In the right way. Process matters. A judge could get to the right result for the right reason, but the legitimacy of the decision might well be undermined if the process in getting to it was wrong. The Latin phrase audi alterum partem means let the other side be heard. It is a core procedural right in our culture, not only in court. For example, would the outcome of a court case, even if it were right, be seen as just if the losing party were not heard by the court? Or whether the losing party has the right to reasons explaining why he or she lost, but these reasons are not provided. Now, think about this for a moment. Is it different for a dispute between siblings arbitrated by a parent? Just to bring it home. People get a sense of real injustice when a judge lets in evidence that should have been excluded, or excludes evidence that should have been admitted. The losing side wonders if the evidence unfairly admitted or left out played a crucial role. That can be deeply problematic. This obviously has implications for ordinary life. Do you rush to judgment without letting the affected people be fairly heard? Do you rely on ad hominem attacks against the person instead of assessing the merit of the other side's argument and addressing that? Do you default without thinking to an ideological position, such as an up-to-the-minute version of political correctness? At the right time. The aphorism that you're all familiar with is justice delayed is justice denied. Judges must get their reasons out as quickly as they can, consistent with prudence in decision making. But if it takes too long, an involved party's sense of anxiety and injustice only increases. Just to generalize a bit, we're all given to procrastination, aren't we? You could give real comfort to a grieving friend, but you wait too long. And then the moment's lost. Another dimension in the law is the concept of ripeness. Is this the case in which it would be wise for the court to change the law? Or would it be better to decide the case on the narrowest possible basis and leave the development of the law to another case? This calls for prudent judgment and judicial humility. And this applies to personal matters too, doesn't it? Both impatience and delay can be costly mistakes. In the right words. At New Judges School, and there is one, believe it or not, we were asked to answer a serious question. Who is the most important person in the courtroom? It certainly is not the judge, not the members of the jury, not one witness or the other, and curiously, not even the victor. The most important person in the room, the one we always keep in mind, is the loser. The loser is entitled to know why the decision was reached and why his or her evidence and arguments were rejected. It's about accountability, cogency, and transparency. Judges must recognize that words can be weapons in criminal cases where deterrence is an important element. The denunciation of criminal behavior can be reflected in the judge's reasons. But strong words can cause real and permanent damage. In family cases, for example, where the relationships must continue after the judge has left the scene, burdening one side or the other with soul-destroying judicial comments solves no problems. In fact, it creates them. Nor do parties who come to court want to see their lives turned inside out through judicial prose that ends up in the press. You know yourselves how the right words can be deeply comforting. You also know how impulsive words can be deeply wounding and eternally searing, especially in family situations. Sometimes they just can't be taken back. There are times when silence is golden, and there are times when silence is just cowardly betrayal. If you focus not so much on your own needs, but on the true needs of the other person, and set aside your own interests, you are most likely to get things right. But if it really is all about you, then the risk of making a foolish mistake is pretty high. So it turns out that the judicial mantra has some some general application. Do the right thing, for the right reason, in the right way, at the right time, and in the right words. Words to live by, perhaps. So how does all this relate to religion? Where is there a point of intersection? Well, it's about character. In my view, religion has an important role to play in forming character. And a well-formed character is essential to good judgment for judges and for everyone else. I'm not asserting, by the way, that one cannot be good without God. I know atheists who are good people. I can only speak of my own path. Christianity calls each one of us to be people whose faith and life are integrated, not only to be people whose faith is limited to Sunday services. We are called to manifest at every instant the cardinal virtues of prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance, and the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity, or love. Let me put before you some words of Joseph Piper about the virtue of prudence. He says there is an axiom that prudence is especially opposed to covetousness. That's an odd concept, but let me just lay it out for you. Covetousness here, he says, means more than the disorderly love of money and property. Covetousness means immoderate straining for all the possessions which man thinks are needed to assure his own importance and status. Covetous means anxiousness, desperate self-preservation, overriding concern for confirmation and security. Need we say how utterly contrary such an attitude is to the fundamental bent of the virtue of prudence? How impossible the informed and receptive silence of the subject before the truth of real things. How impossible just estimate and decision is without a youthful spirit of brave trust and, as it were, a reckless tossing away of anxious self-preservation, a relinquishment of all egotistical bias towards mere confirmation of the self. How utterly, therefore, the virtue of prudence is dependent upon the constant readiness to ignore the self, the limberness of real humility and objectivity. You can see in those lines some echoes of Pascal. People in positions of power also need humility, which does not come easily to high achievers. The successful cultivation of these virtues is the daily work of a lifetime. There is nothing in this cultivation of the virtues that is inconsistent with the public responsibility of being a judge. There is nothing wrong with exercising these virtues in all of the judicial functions that I outlined, or in the normal process of everyday life, whether you're a professional, a student, or a politician. They are essential to justice, but they are also essential to the good life, which is what we all want. It's also about disposition. There are 3 biblical instructions that I find particularly inspiring and to which I return often because backsliding is so human. I commend them to you. The first is, rejoice always. Years ago, there was an HBO series on John Adams, the second American president. Adams is walking in his older age in a field with his son. He suddenly exclaims, "Rejoice evermore," and adds, "That's from Paul." He then tells his son that he wishes he had heard that exhortation earlier in his life, because he might then have done some things differently, been less cantankerous, and perhaps much happier. Rejoice always. That's a basic stance towards the world that I commend highly to you, even though I'm not always successful in holding that stance myself. You should see my face in court. But daily life is filled with little epiphanies, of moments of awe and wonder. You are open to them. Rejoice always and give thanks. The second biblical instruction is this: test everything, embrace the good. This stance towards the world is fundamentally open. By contrast, as Paul Ricoeur observes, the modern approach is to search out the negatives and guard against them, not to identify and embrace the good. The dominant stance of suspicion underpins so much of contemporary academic life and teaching, the ethic of deconstruction. Perhaps you have been inoculated against grace itself and its presence in the faces of the people you meet. But I have found, under the steady hands of many unduly patient mentors, that testing everything and embracing the good is usually the best way to proceed. Try it yourself. See if you can't take the negatives in what you write and say and express them as positives. You will be surprised. You might even become positive in your orientation, heaven forbid, without losing what you see as your effectiveness. Imagine that. The third biblical instruction comes from St. Peter. I had to finish with him because that's my name. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have. So who would ask you for such an account if you did not shine with that inspiring hope? Can people sense that salt and light in you? I'm going to finish up now. You're probably grateful to know. What are Christians today called upon to do in what Walker Percy calls these dread latter days of the Christ-forgetting, Christ-haunted Western world? How do we know, assimilate, and transform modern culture now that the ghost of Constantine is well buried and political power is gone forever? Well, in ancient times, Christians were once often seen, as worthy of imitation. As Tertullian noted, pagans were impressed, saying, "See how they love one another, and how they are ready to die for each other." That gentle sense of decency, order, and kindness was profoundly impressive to a chaotic and predatory society. So people who exemplify the subtle dispositions of prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance, and the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity, people who exemplify authentic and faithful integrity, people who show prayerful humility, are worthy examples. Could anyone go wrong following Micah? Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. In the lead up to Advent, the daily readings reflect the miracles of Jesus. We take them as allegories. They force us to ask ourselves, are we spiritually lame, blind, deaf, mute, or disordered in our minds? The virtue exemplified by all these examples is humility, without which there can be no spiritual growth. Are we proud of heart, so proud that we judge everyone but ourselves, lacking especially spiritual insight into ourselves? What is convincing to the modern mind is whether something works in the real world. Credibility comes more from the force of lived examples than from words. It seems fitting that Thomas More was the first to use the word integrity in English. His faith and his life were integrated. On the scaffold, he famously said, "I die the king's good servant, but God's first." He rightly saw personal and public life as an integral whole that could not be severed. Take Pascal's wager and engage passionately and lovingly, not querulously, with your faith, your church, and your community. Take Ricoeur's challenge and stake your life positively, not by paralyzing inertia and suspicion. Follow Lewis's example and do not draw back in the face of life. I first composed these remarks before the Paris atrocities. I said that we are in this part of the world at least not called upon today, unlike Thomas More, to pay the ultimate price for our faith. But that may not, in fact, be true any longer. Let us remember kindly all the martyrs, ancient and new, in whose steps we walk, sometimes quite thoughtlessly. Let us try to be worthy of their sacrifices. Thank you.